Hey guys, so since my last video, Bitcoin has ended up closing the week fairly weak, below the midpoint of the previous bar. Still a bit stronger than last cycle as we didn't close around the same level as the previous week. We did manage to close a bit above it, but this week has ended up being a reversal week and we're only around 1.5% from breaking the low of the previous week and setting up for that third higher low. Now, one thing I do like is the weekly BX trender is still green. So if we have a look and do a little bit of quick back testing, you can see last cycle, the weekly BX trender was still making higher lows when we came in for that third higher low. And you can see we had this push up, didn't manage to close well. We had another push the following week, still closed down, but afterwards, when everyone probably gave up hope, we managed to make a very big push up. Now you can see one thing that is worth noting is we had this really nice double bottom here where we had two proper lower lows on the week, but this third bottom only just took out the low from the previous week. So it looks like we could very much be setting up for something similar to that this time, because you can see we've got our very nice, double bottom-ish here where the low of the swing low is well below the low of the previous week. But if this week comes down just a tiny bit to, the high $89,000 region, which I think is very likely, whoops, that is not dark mode. You can see we've got long max pain at around $89,010 on the monthly. So, just taking out the low of the previous week seems very, very likely. Now, on the monthly chart, you can see we're still green for this month, and the swing direction is still up as long as we don't take out, $83,000, which I really hope we don't this month, so we can see a little bit more upside before potentially dumping again. But on the daily time frame, you can see we've come down just a smidge over 7%, and I was predicting either 7% up or 7% down, giving it a 50-50 chance. And we did manage to see that 7% down. So it's really nice to see analysis come together. And you can clearly see on the... Well, for starters, we are 6 bars down. And if you notice, usually when we're within a range and we see 6 bars in a single swing direction, that 7th day tends to be a very big bar, sort of like an exhaustion move, before we see a snap reversal the next day. So obviously this was to the upside, but if we get that similar move to the downside, where if we, grind around in today's US market session, which is going to open in around 3 hours, if we, chop around sideways and maybe towards the close or something, we get this massive sell-off, like a capitulation low, not towards the close, like after market close or in tomorrow's session, if we get a capitulation that comes down, and look at what is just over 89,100. It is the 50-day triangular moving average, which we have already bounced off once after breaking above it on the 2nd of January. So if we end up seeing, a big wick below it to $89,000, and then we end up closing above the 50-day TMA, it could end up being a very nice fake out signal to the downside. Because if we come back up to October, you can see when we had a fake out to the upside, we wicked above the 50-day TMA, but closed back beneath it. We obviously saw a massive capitulation to follow. So if we can see that in reverse, it would be very nice. It would be multiple layers of analysis coming together on both the weekly and the daily time frame, and both using Gann analysis taught by Jason and Michael Pizzino over on YouTube, as well as some of our 50 TMA strategies taught by Cowboy Trades, and the weekly BX Trender strategy taught by, Traders Helping Traders, Peter DiCarlo. That would be absolutely wonderful. Now, over at the 4-hour time frame, you can see I really haven't updated my trend lines at all. But you can see on the daily time frame, we are still holding this first fourth time breakout zone at around $90,600, which is nice. Unfortunately, I would have loved to see the market hold above this second fourth time breakout zone, fifth time breakout zone, but unfortunately we have dropped back below it. But for as long as we are holding above $89,000 on a closing basis, I still have hope that we could see some higher prices. It's not much to talk about on the shorter term timeframes, but if you do follow Michael Pizzino's videos, you can understand he has a slightly different opinion to me. He thinks that if we get closes and lower highs under $90,000, even on a shorter term time frame, like the 1 hour or 4 hour, that could mean a very big sell-off is to come, and we could be retesting the $80,000, the mid $80,000 region again. So I'm giving it that extra $1,000 leeway, which Michael is not, but only time will tell who is right. Now, if we have a quick look at the market data, the FOMO Finder is in panic. And if we have a look at what happened the previous cycle, after we topped, you can see, if I can just adjust my sliders here, we got that panic at this first top before we made a higher low, and then we saw a little bit of panic right before the market absolutely capitulated. Now you can see we have seen some panic at the lows, and we've seen a little bit of panic at the top, and now it begs the question, are we going to come in and make this higher low before we see another push up, breaking through these previous tops and making our macro lower high on the monthly time frame and the weekly time frames? Or are we going to just roll over from here because we've already seen that lower high? Now, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but it's really nice to see the FOMO Finder coming together with our Gann swing analysis and our BX Trender analysis on the TradingView charts. Now, if I have a look at assets ranked by market cap, you can see Bitcoin continues to slip, whilst the tech stocks, I think Bitcoin used to be ahead of Amazon, Microsoft, and all that, but not anymore. Silver has taken the spotlight, so it's something Jason's been talking about for ages. Liquidity is going everywhere except into crypto. Daily exchange volume, we have made a higher low, so I wonder if we'll be able to hold this $35 billion per day level and potentially set up for another higher low and another push into a lower high, or if we are just going to peter out again. So I really don't want to see this $26 billion level break. Another interesting thing to see is we have reset the fear and greed indicator by seeing 1 day in greed, and this is something Jason talked about, how we would sit in fear for an extended period of time once we made our cycle top before we would get a brief move into greed, and that could potentially reset the market for another extended move down. So if I switch over to Max, where is 2022? You can see we ended up with a first push into, I guess you could call that greed, 51, made our higher low, and then we ended up with more than 1 day in greed. So because we've only seen 1 day in greed, based off of the fear and greed analysis, I think we are more likely to set up for a higher low and then push up into greed for at least a couple of days before rolling over. but obviously we've got our 89/90k invalidation level. Now, over on the liquidations, there's nothing major to talk about today. We've got $360 million, which is pretty average for the last few months. But yesterday we saw a 24-hour liquidation that got close to $900 million. Now, if you follow Michael, you know that $1 billion liquidation level can often mark significant highs or lows in the market that will last days or weeks. But obviously on the actual day, we only saw around 700 million, but that 24-hour number hit close to 900 million. Now, obviously, that doesn't have to mark the exact low, because if you remember here, on the 19th of November, we saw huge liquidations, but price still went lower, but it really didn't go much lower. I mean, it went, nearly 10% lower, but in terms of actual continuation, that pretty much stopped the market dead, and we've just been chopping sideways. So if we do see that signal here, we did see that signal yesterday, so we might have the low today and the market reverses, or we might get one more day down, but I really don't see the market just nuking from here. And it was the same signal in reverse on this 14th of January. How much did we get? I think we got massive short liquidations. I think the short liquidations on the 24-hour total got close to 700 million. And we do know less people short than long. So we don't actually require $1 billion of short liquidation to mark a significant top. I found around $650 million can often do the job. And that is exactly what we saw here. That marked a very significant top. Price didn't actually manage to go higher. But that is one thing to keep in note, that if we do reverse and just immediately make a push higher, I don't think price will go much higher than 98k unless we see some, at least 1 or 2 more weeks of consolidation. If we just reverse and just swing right up, price might hit, 99k, 101k, 103k, all those levels that Jason and Michael have been talking about. But based off those liquidation numbers alone, I think we are going to need to see this weekly swing reset and potentially take, another 2 or 3 weeks before we start to see that move up, which would actually line up with what Jason has been talking about on the predictive cycles, that TIA indicator suite thing that hopefully you guys pay for because it's kind of useful. That the stock market may see a potential top in mid-February. So that would give us, around 2 or 3 weeks to get to that price point, which lines up with my daily analysis and my weekly analysis. But anyways, not much more to talk about. USDT is, obviously bouncy a little bit, but we're still, actually, are we coming into that 50% level from the underside? It looks like we are. We're coming into, look at that. We have rejected right off of the 50% level of our recent swing. So, we could be approaching a significant low, at least on the daily and weekly timeframes for Bitcoin. But anyways, thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And hopefully Bitcoin can reverse and give us that relief rally that all altcoin holders need to dump their bags into unsuspecting hands of people who think the cycle is not over. Peace out.